September 1st, 1943. A Japanese naval base in the South Pacific. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai's sitting in a humid tent scanning through intelligence reports with his one good eye. The other one? American gunners took that from him a year earlier. But right now, he's laughing. Actually, laughing out loud. The report in his hands talks about a new American fighter called the Hellcat. And according to Japanese intelligence, it's a joke. The thing weighs twice what a Zero weighs. It's wide as a transport plane, heavy as a bomber. Sakai reads the specs again and shakes his head. Another American failure, he thinks. These guys just don't get it. Outside the tent, you can see rows of A6M Zeros lined up on the airfield. Sleek, deadly, absolutely beautiful machines. For 2 years, these fighters have dominated Pacific skies. British Hurricanes? Done. American P-40s? Easy. Dutch Brewster Buffaloes? Don't even get him started. Every single Allied fighter that showed up got torn apart by the Zero. And now the Americans built something that's basically a flying tank and they're calling it a fighter. Sakai and his fellow pilots think it's hilarious. Here's what none of them know. In exactly 30 days, this failure of an aircraft is going to start the complete destruction of Japanese naval aviation. We're talking about a victory ratio of 19-1. Over 5,000 enemy aircraft destroyed. The math of aerial combat's about to get completely rewritten by a plane that looks wrong, flies heavy, and seems to break every rule. But here's the crazy part. What happened in those 30 days is absolutely insane. Before we get into how a fighter that seemed like a complete joke became the deadliest aircraft in the Pacific, hit that subscribe button and drop a like on this video. Turn on notifications too, because the story you're about to hear is wild and we've got way more like this coming. Let's dive in. The Japanese confidence in September 1943 wasn't just arrogance, it was math. Since December 7th, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service had been putting up victory ratios that seemed impossible. At Pearl Harbor, they lost 29 aircraft while destroying 347. In the Philippines, 7 losses against 103 destroyed. Over Darwin, 2 planes down, 30 destroyed. The British Far East Fleet's air arm? Wiped out. The Dutch East Indies Air Force? Gone in days. These weren't close fights. These were massacres. And at the center of all this was the Mitsubishi A6M Zero. When American engineers got their hands on a captured Zero in 1942, they refused to believe the performance numbers. A fighter with the range of a bomber, the turning ability of a biplane, and enough firepower to shred anything it caught. It seemed impossible, but it was real. The Zero pulled it off through revolutionary design. They used this classified aluminum alloy called extra super duralumin that created a structure 30% lighter than American designs. But here's where it gets wild. No armor plate to protect the pilot. None. No self-sealing fuel tanks. They even removed the radio to save 30 pounds. Everything sacrificed for pure performance. And it worked. The Zero's turning radius was 612 feet. In a dogfight, if you're turning tighter, you win. You get on their tail, they can't shake you, it's over. American fighters were turning way, way wider circles. Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, who'd become Japan's ace of aces with 87 victories, wrote about the Zero. Flying the Zero is like wearing wings. The aircraft responds to thought. American planes fly like trucks, powerful but clumsy. They build fighters like cars, heavy, overbuilt, wasteful. By mid-1943, Japanese pilots had dominated for 2 years. The Zero's philosophy seemed perfect. Why need armor when you're so maneuverable nobody can hit you? Why carry extra weight when speed and agility win fights? The math supported it. The victories proved it. Meanwhile, American engineers were building something completely different. A fighter weighing over 12,000 pounds, armor plate everywhere, self-sealing tanks holding 250 gallons, 6 heavy machine guns with 2,400 rounds, a massive engine producing 2,000 horsepower. Compared to the Zero's 5,800 pounds, it looked absurd. Japanese intelligence laughed. This thing was going to be a flying target. The first Hellcat reports showed up in Japanese intelligence files in early 1943 through neutral Swedish sources. When analysts read the specs, they thought it had to be propaganda. The numbers didn't make sense for a fighter. 12,186 pounds fully loaded, the Zero weighed 5,800. The Hellcat's wing area was massive, 334 square feet with this big, draggy radial engine. It carried 2,400 rounds of ammunition, armor plate everywhere, bulletproof glass, self-sealing tanks holding 250 gallons. Everything screamed bomber, not fighter. Captain Minoru Genda, who'd planned Pearl Harbor, reviewed the specs. His analysis was dismissive. The Americans have learned nothing. This Hellcat represents their failed philosophy, attempting to overcome pilot skill with weight of machinery. A Zero will fly circles around it. Looking at the math, he had a point. The Zero's wing loading gave it that turning radius of 612 feet. The Hellcats suggested over 900 feet. In a turning fight, the basis of all Japanese tactics, the Hellcat would be helpless. The Zero would just stay glued to its tail. Game over. September 30th, 1943, Marcus Island. Theory met reality. Petty Officer First Class Yoshio Fukui was flying escort when he spotted 6 dark shapes climbing from the southeast. First thought, B-25 bombers. Then they turned. Single engine, massive body, short wings. The Hellcat. First time seeing one. Fukui engaged with standard tactics. Roll into a diving turn, expect the heavy fighter to go straight, curve onto its tail. Simple, proven. Except the Hellcat didn't run or turn. It went vertical, straight up. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 pumping 2,000 horsepower, 700 more than the Zero's 1130, drove that thing skyward at 3,500 feet per minute. Fukui tried to follow. His airspeed dropped. The Hellcat kept climbing. At 15,000 feet, the Hellcat did a hammerhead turn, go straight up, stall at the top, kick the rudder, drop back down. This thing was supposed to be too heavy for that. It wasn't. The Hellcat flipped over and dropped right onto Fukui's tail. Perfect position, just suddenly there. The American opened fire at 400 meters, Fukui wrote. 6 machine guns, not 4. The volume of fire was unprecedented. My aircraft took 17 hits in 3 seconds. Only by dropping into a spin did I escape. Fukui barely made it back with his Zero full of holes. His wingman didn't come back. Neither did the reconnaissance plane. Japanese intelligence said it'd be helpless. Instead, it went vertical when it should have been too heavy, turned when it should have been too clumsy, and delivered devastating firepower. 1 Zero barely made it back. 2 aircraft didn't. The Americans had drawn first blood in a way that made 0 sense according to everything the Japanese knew. 5 days later, October 5th, 1943, Wake Island. Lieutenant Yoshio Shiga led 12 Zeros from the 252nd Air Group to intercept what looked like another hit-and-run raid. American carriers had been doing these for months, usually running before Japanese fighters could fully engage. Not this time. We climbed to 20,000 feet, Shiga wrote in his diary. Below us, 12 F6F fighters in 3 divisions. We held every advantage: altitude, position, surprise. Victory was certain. The engagement that followed shattered Japanese tactical doctrine. As the Zeros dove on the Hellcats, the American fighters didn't scatter or try to turn. They maintained formation, accelerating in a gentle dive that kept their energy high. When the Zeros opened fire at maximum range, hoping for lucky hits, the Hellcats just absorbed it. The armor plate, 212 pounds protecting the pilot, 110 pounds around the oil system, self-sealing tanks that could take dozens of hits. The Zeros were shooting at something that wouldn't go down. Then the Hellcats counterattacked. Instead of turning to dogfight, they used their weight as a weapon. Climbing at full power, they reached altitude where the Zero's engine struggled for oxygen. At 25,000 feet, the Hellcat was still producing 1,650 horsepower. The Zero was down to 900. "They came down on us like hawks," Shiga wrote. "Their weight gave them speed we couldn't match. They'd dive, fire those 6 terrible guns, then climb away before we could react. We'd try to follow them up, and our engines would gasp. They'd just loop back and hit us again." 8 Zeros went down. No Hellcats were lost, not one. The Americans had figured out something the Japanese hadn't considered. You don't need to turn with your enemy if you can control the vertical space. Go high, dive fast, climb back up. The Zero's incredible turning ability meant nothing if the Hellcat never stayed in the turning fight. It was like bringing a knife to a gunfight, except the guy with the gun also controlled the high ground and could shoot from wherever he wanted. The math had just changed. Weight wasn't a weakness. It was power. It was speed in a dive. It was climb rate at altitude. Everything the Japanese thought made the Hellcat vulnerable was actually making it deadly. November 1943, Rabaul. The assembled pilots of the 204th Air Group listened as Lieutenant Commander Takeo Tanemizu briefed them on American tactics. Tanemizu had 32 victories and was one of the few pilots who'd survived multiple Hellcat encounters. "Forget everything you know about air combat," he told them. "The Americans have changed the rules. They no longer fight our fight. They fight like executioners, not warriors." Tanemizu explained what Japanese pilots were slowly, painfully learning. The Hellcat wasn't designed to outturn the Zero. It was designed to never need to. Using something called energy fighting, Hellcat pilots maintained speed and altitude, converting potential energy to kinetic energy in slashing attacks that gave Zero pilots no chance to use their superior maneuverability. "They work in pairs," Tanemizu continued, "one high, one low. While you engage one, the other's already diving on you. Their radios, which we laughed at for adding weight, let them coordinate perfectly. We fly as individual samurai. They fight as a machine." The technology gap was widening fast. The Hellcat's 6 Browning M2 machine guns fired 750 rounds per minute each. That's 4,500 rounds per minute total. Each 50 caliber bullet weighed 46 grams and traveled at 2,900 feet per second, delivering massive energy on impact. The Zero's guns, way less firepower, way less punch. But here's what really changed everything: radar-guided fighter direction. While Japanese pilots relied on eyesight to spot enemies, Hellcat pilots were being guided to their targets by shipboard radar controllers who could see Japanese aircraft from 50 miles away. It was like fighting with a map while your enemy's flying blind. Lieutenant Sadamu Komachi described his first radar-directed interception. "We were climbing through clouds when they hit us. No warning, no visual contact. Hellcats diving from above, exactly on our heading, perfectly positioned. They knew where we were, our altitude, our course. We were blind men fighting those who could see in the dark." The Japanese were bringing pilot skill and aircraft performance to a fight where the Americans had turned combat into a system. Individual excellence versus coordinated technology. And the technology was winning. Every single time. By early 1944, the Japanese pilot crisis was becoming catastrophic. Pre-war Imperial Navy pilots had trained for 3 years with 700 flight hours before seeing combat. They were artists of aerial warfare. By 1944, pilots were entering combat with 300 hours. Some had never fired their guns in flight. Fuel shortages meant most training happened in gliders. Gunnery practice was limited to 50 rounds per pilot. Formation flying, instrument flight, radio procedures, all eliminated to rush guys to the front. Meanwhile, American pilots were arriving with 300 hours minimum, including 50 hours in their specific aircraft type. They'd fired thousands of practice rounds, practiced carrier landings until they were automatic, learned energy tactics safely over Texas airfields. Lieutenant Commander Yoshihiro Hashimoto, a training officer, wrote, "We are sending children to fight professionals." October 1944. The Battle of Formosa. Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome committed everything to stop American carrier raids. Over 700 aircraft, including the last trained pilots from homeland training squadrons. The Japanese claimed spectacular victory. 26 carriers and battleships sunk, 300 aircraft destroyed. The reality? Actual American losses were 89 aircraft. Japanese losses were 329 aircraft, and almost every experienced pilot left. Lieutenant Sadaki Akamatsu, one of the few survivors, described it. The Hellcats were waiting at every altitude. As we climbed, they were above us. As we dove, they were below. They'd divided the sky into grids, each section covered. It wasn't combat. It was systematic extermination. Then came June 19th, 1944. The Philippine Sea. Operation A-Go. The Japanese Navy committed 9 carriers, 450 aircraft, their best remaining pilots. Against them, Task Force 58 with 15 carriers and 956 aircraft, 450 of them Hellcats. Admiral Ozawa launched his first wave at 0830, 69 aircraft. American radar detected them at 150 miles. Hellcats were positioned perfectly. Altitude advantage, sun at their backs, approaching from blind spots. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, leading the fighter escort, saw them minutes before engagement. They were stacked from 20,000 to 30,000 feet, at least 60 of them, waiting like a steel curtain. We were at 18,000. Every advantage was theirs. The engagement lasted 12 minutes. Of 69 Japanese aircraft, 42 went down. Commander David McCampbell shot down 7 that single day. His wingman got 6. By day's end, 346 Japanese carrier aircraft were gone. American losses? 30 from all causes. American pilots that evening coined the term turkey shoot. Unable to compete conventionally, Japan turned to a desperate new approach in October 1944. The losses had been catastrophic. The training pipeline couldn't keep up. The experienced pilots were gone. Vice Admiral Takijiro Onishi laid out the math in stark terms. If a Zero attacks a carrier conventionally, probability of success is near zero. The Hellcats will destroy it before it even gets close. If the Zero becomes a weapon itself, probability of hitting increases to 30%. Either way, the outcome for the pilot's the same. At least this way there's a higher chance of actually damaging something. Training was reduced to 40 to 50 hours total, about 1 week. Just enough to take off, navigate to a target, and aim the aircraft. No combat training, no evasion techniques, no gunnery practice. They weren't teaching these guys how to fight. They were teaching them how to become guided missiles. None of it mattered anymore. The skilled dogfighters were all gone, and there wasn't time to train new ones. October 25th, 1944. Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, Japan's greatest ace with 87 confirmed victories, escorted the first official mission led by Lieutenant Yukio Seki. Nishizawa was there to protect them on the way in, then return home. He claimed his 86th and 87th victories that day. 2 F6F Hellcats. Still had it. still one of the best pilots Japan had left. The next day, October 26th, Nishizawa was flying as a passenger on a transport aircraft when Hellcats from VF-14 intercepted it. Japan's best pilot, helpless without a fighter, went down to the very aircraft he'd briefly beaten. That's how dominant the Hellcat had become. Even Japan's ace of aces couldn't survive an encounter if he wasn't in a cockpit. April to June 1945, Okinawa, the final desperate push. Japan launched 1,900 sorties against the American fleet anchored off the island, wave after wave of attacks trying to break through. The Hellcat became a defender against this onslaught, standing between the fleet and destruction. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia, leading his Flying Circus division, shot down 23 Japanese aircraft during the campaign alone. His tactical innovations made conventional Japanese tactics completely useless. Valencia's division developed what they called the mowing machine. 4 Hellcats in line abreast, separated by 100 yards, sweeping through Japanese formations at high speed. Each pilot covered his sector. No gaps, no escape routes. They'd make one pass, climb back to altitude, and repeat. Systematic, efficient, deadly. The numbers from Okinawa were stark. Hellcats flew 38,038 combat sorties, claimed 2,351 victories against 249 losses. That's a 9.5 to 1 ratio even in defensive operations. More significantly, they stopped approximately 80% of attacks before they reached their targets. The desperate new approach wasn't working. The Hellcats were just too good at their job. By 1945, the F6F incorporated improvements that made it even deadlier. Water injection boosting power to 2,200 horsepower. Zero-length rocket launchers for ground attack. Improved armor plating. Computing gun sights that calculated deflection automatically. The pilot just had to keep the target in the reticle, and the sight did the math. The technology gap had become a chasm. Japan was sending pilots with 1 week of training against a system that had perfected the art of aerial interception. It wasn't a fight anymore. It was mathematics. The Hellcat's dominance wasn't just about design or tactics, it was about production. Grumman's Bethpage, New York factory operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. At peak production, a brand new Hellcat rolled off the assembly line every 60 minutes. Every single hour, another fighter ready to go. The company built 12,275 Hellcats in 30 months. Think about that scale. Japan produced 5,100 fighters of all types in 1944 alone. America produced 35,000 fighters that same year. The production system itself was revolutionary. Workers using color-coded instructions to assemble complex components. Shifts operating around the clock without quality dropping. Every R2800 engine contained 2,840 precision-machined parts, and each one was completely interchangeable with any other R2800. You could pull an engine from one Hellcat and drop it into another without any modifications. Perfect standardization. Japan couldn't do that. The Nakajima Sakai engine powering the Zero required hand-fitting of components. No 2 engines were exactly alike. Mechanics had to custom adjust parts to make them work. What took American factories minutes took Japanese factories hours or days. Professor Jiro Horikoshi, the guy who designed the Zero, studied captured Hellcats after the war ended. His conclusion was absolutely devastating. We designed an aircraft for 1941. They designed an aircraft system for 1945. While we were perfecting the sword, they were building the industrial age. That's really what it came down to. Philosophy. The Zero represented individual excellence. Strip away everything unnecessary, make the pilot and the machine one unified weapon, trust in skill and spirit to overcome material disadvantages. The Hellcat represented systematic superiority. Protect your pilots with armor, give them overwhelming firepower, build aircraft faster than the enemy can shoot them down, train pilots thoroughly, and bring them home alive to train others. These weren't just different design choices, they were different ways of looking at warfare itself. The Zero demanded its pilots sacrifice themselves for victory. Light weight meant no protection. Extended range meant sitting in a cramped cockpit for hours with no margin for error. The Hellcat was built around keeping its pilots alive. Heavy armor, self-sealing tanks, rugged construction that could take punishment and still fly home. One philosophy said the warrior was expendable, the other said the warrior was valuable. By August 1945, the numbers told the complete story. Of the 18,000 naval aviators Japan started the war with, fewer than 100 combat-experienced pilots remained. The Hellcat had produced 305 American aces, accounted for 75% of all Navy air-to-air victories in the Pacific, destroyed 5,223 enemy aircraft while losing just 270 in air combat. A 19-to-1 victory ratio that's never been matched since. The Japanese pilots had laughed at the Hellcat in September 1943 because they saw weight and thought weakness. They didn't understand that every extra pound represented the strength of a nation that could afford to protect its people. By the time they figured it out, their air force had ceased to exist. So here's the final score. The F6F Hellcat entered service weighing twice what the Zero weighed. It carried armor the Zero didn't have. It was powered by an engine the Japanese couldn't build. Armed with weapons they couldn't match. Guided by radars they couldn't detect. Flown by pilots they couldn't equal in training. And produced in numbers they literally couldn't comprehend. Japanese pilots laughed at it in September 1943 because they didn't understand what they were looking at. Every extra pound wasn't weakness, it was strength. It was the capacity of an industrial power that could afford to protect its warriors instead of treating them as expendable assets. It was the difference between perfecting a weapon and building a complete system. The Hellcat didn't just win battles, it fundamentally changed how naval warfare worked. Before the Hellcat, carriers were seen as vulnerable platforms that needed to strike first to survive. The Hellcat flipped that completely. Carriers became fortresses. American fleets could park off enemy coastlines for weeks, their Hellcat umbrella making them essentially untouchable. Admiral Mark Mitcher understood this transformation perfectly. "We're the Hellcat," he said. "We don't need to find them first. Let them come. The F6F will destroy them at our convenience." That confidence was backed by numbers that speak for themselves. 5,223 enemy aircraft destroyed in aerial combat, 270 Hellcats lost to enemy fighters, a 19-to-1 victory ratio, 305 aces produced, 75% of all Navy air-to-air victories in the Pacific. These aren't just statistics, they're the story of complete aerial supremacy. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, that same pilot who was laughing at intelligence reports in September 1943, lived until the year 2000. In his final interview, somebody asked him about the Hellcat. His response captured everything. The Zero made Japan a great naval power. The Hellcat made Japan realize it was never as great as it believed. We thought we were samurai. The Hellcat showed us we were just men with outdated weapons, facing the future. That's the ultimate lesson here. The Hellcat proved that in modern warfare, the nation that builds the better system will crush the nation that only builds better individual warriors. Skill matters, training matters, spirit matters. But when one side's bringing all of that plus overwhelming material superiority, systematic coordination and industrial capacity that can replace losses faster than the enemy can inflict them, it's not even a contest. The Japanese pilots laughed at the F6F Hellcat because it violated everything they knew about fighter design. It was too heavy, too slow in turns, too complicated, too expensive. They saw all the extra weight and thought it would be easy prey. They were wrong. That weight was armor bringing pilots home. That complexity was technology giving them every advantage. That expense was a nation investing in victory. By the time they stopped laughing, their air force was gone. The Hellcat had the last word. It always did. If you made it this far, thanks for sticking around. This story's wild, right? The aircraft everyone laughed at became the most dominant fighter of World War II. If you enjoyed this deep dive into aviation history, make sure you hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what historical topic you want us to cover next. Should we do more World War II aircraft? Naval battles? Something completely different? Let me know down below. And seriously, subscribe if you haven't already. We're dropping videos like this every week covering the craziest, most untold stories from military history. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.